The market does not move because of numbers. It moves because of emotion, because of human desire, fear, and hope, coded into the rhythm of price. Every chart, every candle, is not a pattern of probability but a reflection of psychology. You think you are trading a market, but in truth, you are trading yourself. In the beginning, every trader believes the goal is to master the market. But over time, you realize the market was never the real battlefield. The real battle lives within, between emotion and awareness, between ego and truth. You think you're fighting volatility, but you're fighting your own mind. Every loss is a mirror, every win, a test. Emotion is the oldest language of humanity. Before words, before reason, emotion told us how to survive. In trading, those same emotions resurface: fear, greed, pride, hope. They whisper through every tick, every red candle, every sudden spike. And the ego listens. The ego wants control, recognition, validation. It wants to win, not to understand. But the market doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about your belief or your pride. It reflects your state of being with perfect neutrality. If you are afraid, it will show you fear. If you are greedy, it will amplify greed. If you are calm, it will move as though time itself breathes through you. The market is not chaos, it is rhythm, and emotion is the drumbeat. Most traders hear noise, few hear music, because to hear the music, you must first become still. You must learn to sit inside the storm without being moved by it. That stillness is not built overnight. It begins with awareness. Awareness of how your body reacts when you lose. Awareness of the tension when price moves against you. Awareness of how you justify mistakes just to protect your ego. Without awareness, you repeat the same mistakes, calling them strategy. With awareness, even losses become teachers. To trade with awareness is to see without judgment. It's to feel emotion without being owned by it. The goal is not to eliminate emotion. That's impossible. The goal is to understand its rhythm, to respond instead of react. When fear comes, you acknowledge it. When greed rises, you observe it. When doubt appears, you breathe through it. That breath, that single moment of pause, changes everything. Every trader must pass through three gates. The first is emotion, where you act from impulse and confusion. The second is ego, where you chase perfection and control. And the third is awareness, where you begin to see through both. Only then does the market start to make sense, because you no longer project your inner chaos onto it. The ego will resist. It will tell you to double down, to revenge trade, to prove you are right. It will disguise insecurity as confidence, recklessness as courage. But awareness watches without attachment. It doesn't fight ego. It understands it. Because the moment you fight, you've already lost balance. You don't conquer emotion by suppressing it. You dissolve it by understanding its source. Every emotion in trading arises from one illusion: the illusion of control. You think you can control the outcome. You think you can force the market to reward your belief. But the market is infinite, and you are finite. To fight it is to suffer. Freedom begins when you stop demanding certainty, when you allow the market to be what it is, when you focus not on prediction, but on alignment. The mind quiets and the market opens. You see patterns not because you seek them, but because you're clear enough to perceive them. And in that clarity, probability becomes poetry. The best traders are not fearless. They are simply aware. They feel fear, but they don't obey it. They feel greed, but they don't chase it. They feel pride, but they don't feed it. They've learned to be the witness behind emotion, the awareness behind the noise. That's why they last, not because they are always right, but because they remain centered when wrong. When awareness grows, trading becomes something sacred. It's no longer about numbers or systems or perfect timing. It becomes meditation in motion. Every click, every decision, every hesitation reveals something about who you are. The market becomes a mirror for self-awareness, and you start to understand. The real profit is not money. The real profit is clarity. Clarity is what allows you to stop forcing, to stop reacting, to stop needing to be right. Clarity turns trading into flow, and in flow, effort disappears. You execute without tension. You analyze without anxiety. You lose without collapse. Because nothing can take from you what you no longer cling to. That is the beginning of mastery. Not mastery over the market, mastery over yourself. Because when you master yourself, the market no longer controls your mind. And when the mind is free, the profit follows. When you spend enough time with the market, the noise starts to fade. What once felt chaotic begins to feel rhythmic. The randomness you feared begins to reveal patterns, not of numbers, but of emotion. You start to realize that every price movement, every spike, every sudden collapse is a reflection of collective feeling. It is the global heartbeat of human psychology, fear and greed pulsing through data. And then, something deeper unfolds. You begin to see that the market is not moving against you. It is moving through you. It mirrors your emotions, your impulses, your beliefs about control. The ego wants to dominate this mirror. It wants to believe it knows. It wants to win. But awareness has no such desire. It doesn't need to win. It only needs to see clearly. The difference between awareness and ego is like the difference between silence and noise. Ego shouts. Awareness listens. Ego reacts. Awareness responds. Ego seeks control. Awareness seeks balance. When you begin to trade from awareness instead of ego, something profound happens. The market no longer feels hostile. You stop being at war with it. You begin to move with it, like a surfer who no longer fights the wave, but rides it. Control is the illusion that drives most traders to destruction. We want to control the outcome because we are afraid to face uncertainty. We want to believe that perfect analysis can remove risk. But uncertainty is not a problem to solve. It is the environment itself. When you fight uncertainty, you fight reality. When you accept it, you begin to see clearly within it. To trade from awareness is to trade without resistance. You still feel emotion, but you are no longer ruled by it. When fear arises, you breathe. When greed whispers, you smile. When pride flares, you step back. That pause, that breath between impulse and action, is the difference between chaos and clarity. The untrained mind craves intensity. It chases the rush, the thrill, the constant motion. But trading is not entertainment. It is exposure. It reveals who you are when no one is watching. Every trade is a reflection of your inner world. The undisciplined trader fears silence because in silence they must face themselves. But those who learn to stay still, to observe, to listen, they begin to hear the rhythm beneath the chaos. That rhythm is what separates survival from mastery, because once you feel it, you no longer chase trades. You wait for alignment. You trade not because you want to, but because it's time to. Every action becomes a deliberate expression of awareness. Trading becomes meditation in motion. There will be days when everything flows, when you execute with clarity, when losses don't shake you, when your heart feels still even as price whips back and forth. Those days are rare, and that's okay. The goal is not perfection. It is balance within imperfection. Even the masters feel emotion. They simply don't let emotion choose their next move. The ego hates this stillness. It needs identity. It wants to feel important. It builds walls of belief about systems, about certainty, about control. But the market is wind. It moves around walls. It cannot be caged. The more rigid you are, the easier you break. The more flexible you become, the longer you last. Flexibility is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the humility to adapt without losing your center. Ego equates being wrong with failure. Awareness sees being wrong as feedback. The faster you learn to accept feedback, the faster you evolve. Growth only begins where judgment ends. Within every chart, there's a conversation between chaos and order. The same conversation exists within you. There is the chaos of emotion, wild, reactive, raw, and the order of awareness, still, patient, precise. Most traders only live in chaos. They react, they chase, they panic. But the path to mastery is not about silencing chaos. It's about learning to stand still while it moves around you. At some point, every trader learns to stop fighting losses, not because they don't care, but because they understand that losses are part of balance. A loss is not punishment, it's information. The ego sees a wound, awareness sees a correction. You lose to learn what to release. You win to learn what to keep. Gratitude becomes the quiet revolution of the trader's mind. When you trade with gratitude, fear loses its grip. You stop needing to win. You start appreciating the process. Every trade becomes a lesson. Every outcome becomes neutral. Gratitude shifts you from scarcity to abundance. You are no longer chasing more. You are refining who you are. And that's the secret. The market doesn't reward need. It rewards neutrality. When you stop needing to win, you start aligning with probability. When you stop fearing loss, you start seeing opportunity. The market doesn't test your strategy. It tests your state. Your emotional state defines your performance more than your technical skill ever will. When you accept uncertainty, peace follows. Peace is not the absence of movement. It's stillness within motion. It's the calm center within the storm. That peace is what allows traders to sustain. Without it, they burn out. They drown in the waves they tried to control. Awareness doesn't fight the wave. It floats. And in that floating, you realize something profound. The less you try to control, the more control you gain. Not over the market, but over yourself. The less you chase, the more clearly you see. The less you need, the more aligned you become. Profit becomes an echo, a reflection of your internal state. At that stage, trading becomes poetry. Every candle is a verse, every loss a metaphor, every profit a moment of harmony. You no longer look at the market as a battlefield, but as a mirror. You see humanity, its fear, its greed, its hope, all dancing within the chart. And somewhere within that dance, you recognize yourself. The deeper your awareness grows, the softer your edges become. Ambition turns to curiosity. Pressure turns to peace. The need to prove becomes the joy to observe. And you realize something you never saw before, that the thing you were chasing through profit was never wealth. It was freedom. Freedom from the noise. Freedom from the chase. Freedom from the illusion that control equals safety. freedom from ego's endless hunger. And you realize that freedom was never waiting at the end of success. It was waiting in the moment you let go. Detachment becomes your new discipline, not detachment as indifference, but detachment as clarity. You care deeply, but you don't cling. You act fully, but you don't force. You participate completely, but you don't depend. You understand that what is yours will align when the time is right, and what isn't will pass, no matter how tightly you hold on. Trading becomes a spiritual practice disguised as numbers. You begin to see how every emotional reaction mirrors an old story. Fear of missing out becomes fear of inadequacy. Revenge trading becomes the search for validation. Holding losers too long becomes attachment to identity. You are no longer just studying the market. You are studying yourself. And that's when mastery begins. When you see that the real game was never out there, it was always within. When you realize that every chart was a mirror and every loss a lesson in letting go, the ego fades, awareness takes its place, and in that awareness, trading becomes art. Art built not from control, but from flow, not from prediction, but from presence, not from fear, but from understanding. And in that understanding, you stop trying to predict the market and start feeling it. You don't analyze to be right. You align to be clear. You don't chase opportunity. You allow opportunity to come when you're ready. Because when the mind is still, the market reveals itself. The rhythm appears. The noise dissolves. And profit, like breath, becomes natural. That is the psychology of profit. Emotion is the signal. Ego is the distortion. Awareness is the clarity. And you, the trader, are simply the observer, learning to see through it all. There is a strange silence that exists after every trade. The screen still glows, the numbers still move, but your heart is no longer beating with the same rhythm. You begin to feel the weight of the aftermath, the echoes of emotion that trail behind every decision. The market has already moved on, but your mind stays trapped inside the moment you clicked. That single moment defines whether you're learning or repeating. And most traders, without realizing it, are living in a loop they built themselves. The loop begins with a single emotion: anticipation. Before every trade, before every chart pattern, before every candle forms, there is a subtle thrill, a spark of hope. The ego calls it intuition, but more often it is illusion. We imagine that the next trade will redeem us, that the next position will finally prove we understand the market. But the truth is, the market is not something to understand. It is something to align with. The ego seeks to dominate. The wise trader seeks to adapt. You see, emotion is not your enemy. Emotion is a mirror. It reflects the state of your internal world when faced with uncertainty. When you fear losing, you are not fearing the market. You are fearing the loss of control. When you chase a winning streak, you are not pursuing profit. You are chasing validation. The market becomes the stage on which your psychological drama plays out in real time. Every tick exposes a piece of who you are beneath the surface. To master emotion, you do not suppress it. Suppression is another form of fear. You must observe emotion, trace it, question it. You ask, why do I feel the need to act? What am I trying to prove? The ego hates these questions because they dissolve its illusion of power. The ego wants movement, constant action. It tells you that stillness is weakness. But in truth, stillness is mastery. The best traders are often the quietest ones. They know that silence holds more information than noise. Markets move in cycles, up, down, sideways, and so does human emotion. Fear turns to greed, greed turns to overconfidence, and overconfidence returns to fear. This loop never ends, it only changes faces. To break free, you must rise above the cycle, not by fighting it, but by watching it unfold. You begin to see patterns not just in price action, but in your own behavior. The chart becomes a mirror of your mind. Imagine you are watching a storm through a window. The wind howls, the rain hits the glass, but you are dry and calm inside. That is emotional mastery. You no longer need to predict the weather, you simply adjust your sails when it changes. Every trader must reach this point if they wish to survive long enough to profit, because profit is not the goal, it is the byproduct of clarity. But clarity is not free. It requires the destruction of illusions, the breaking of identity. You must unlearn what you think trading is. Many enter the market believing it is a battlefield. They treat every position like a fight to win. But the market is not your enemy. The market is a reflection of collective consciousness, a vast field of human fear, greed, and reaction. You're not fighting the market. You're fighting your own impulses within it. This realization changes everything. When you stop trying to beat the market, you start to understand yourself through it. Every loss becomes feedback, not failure. Every win becomes data, not ego fuel. You no longer ride emotional highs and lows because you realize the game is not about victory. It is about endurance. There is a quiet strength in the trader who no longer reacts. You can feel it when they speak. Few words, but every word measured. They do not chase opportunity. They let opportunity come. This stillness is not passivity. It is control. A trader in control of emotion can withstand chaos. A trader controlled by ego is already lost. Even before placing a trade, ego feeds on comparison. It thrives when you look at others' profits, when you scroll through screenshots, when you measure your worth against someone else's result. But every time you compare, you hand your piece to a stranger. The market doesn't care who you envy. It only responds to discipline and patience. Ego will always tell you that you're behind. Wisdom will remind you there is no race. There is only rhythm. And rhythm is what connects every consistent trader. They move with the market, not against it. They sense the flow, not through prediction, but through presence. Presence is the antidote to ego. When you're fully present, you cannot fear the future or regret the past. You only respond to what is. That is the essence of flow. The best trades are born not from analysis alone, but from the still mind that listens. You will notice something when you trade in presence. Time slows down. The candles move, but your mind stays clear. You begin to feel detached, not cold, but calm. Detached from the outcome, yet deeply connected to the process. It is in this state that precision emerges, not because you control the market, but because you finally control yourself. But the ego will try to return. It always does. It whispers in small ways. You should have entered earlier. You're missing out. Double your position. Ego never sleeps. It hides behind logic, disguises itself as confidence. To spot it, you must stay vigilant. Every thought that creates pressure to act is ego. Every impulse to prove something is ego. The moment you recognize it, you weaken it. Awareness is the weapon that dissolves ego without a fight. There will come a day when you lose not because of analysis, but because you betrayed your discipline. That loss will hurt differently. It won't be about money, but about self-respect. You will see clearly that your biggest opponent was not volatility. It was the voice inside that couldn't wait. When that realization comes, do not resist it. Sit with it. That pain is not punishment, it is purification. It burns away the layers of illusion until what remains is awareness. Awareness changes your relationship with the market. You begin to see trades as probabilities, not certainties. You stop expecting perfection. You stop taking it personally. You stop being addicted to being right. You stop trying to predict and start preparing. In that shift, peace returns. The noise fades. You begin to trade yourself more than you trade the chart. And that is where transformation begins. The trader becomes a philosopher. The chart becomes a teacher. The market becomes a mirror. You stop chasing outcomes and start mastering response. The mind quiets, the ego softens, and your emotions no longer dictate your reality. They become signals, data, inputs in your internal system. You learn to pause not because you are afraid, but because you are aware. You enter not because of FOMO, but because of flow. You exit not because of fear, but because of structure. Every action begins to align with intention. You no longer need luck because you're not playing a game. You are executing a plan. And in that stillness, profit stops being random. It becomes the echo of discipline, the reflection of patience, the outcome of emotional mastery. The trader who reaches this point stops chasing money because they have found something deeper: clarity. They have realized that every market movement is neutral. Only the mind assigns meaning. Once you see this, you can never unsee it. You begin to notice how emotion drives the world. Headlines are emotional. Tweets are emotional. Economic forecasts are emotional. Entire markets rise and fall not because of logic, but because of collective psychology. And yet, within that chaos, the wise trader stays grounded because they no longer trade the news, they trade the reaction to it. That is the essence of emotional intelligence in trading: to read beyond data, beyond fear, beyond noise, and into the psychology behind every move. You start to feel the rhythm of mass emotion, the same rhythm that once controlled you. But now, you observe it from above, detached, calm, precise. Emotion once made you chase the market. Now emotion becomes your compass. Ego once blinded you to risk. Now humility becomes your edge. The same forces that once trapped you now serve you because you finally learn to listen. In time, every trader faces the same realization: the market doesn't reward intelligence, it rewards discipline. It doesn't care about your past success or your confidence. It doesn't even care about your strategy. It only cares about how you behave when things don't go your way. That is where the truth is revealed: between impulse and patience, between emotion and reason, between ego and awareness. When the chart moves against you, what rises first? Is it fear? Is it denial? Or is it calm? The answer reveals everything. For emotion always arrives before logic, and the distance between the two determines your growth. The longer you can stay in observation before reaction, the closer you move toward mastery. Most people think trading is about numbers, but numbers are only shadows. What truly moves the market are stories. Stories we tell ourselves about value, about opportunity, about risk, about certainty. These stories create emotion. Emotion becomes decision, and decision becomes movement. The market is not math, it's psychology painted in price. You begin to understand this when you stop staring at charts and start observing behavior. Every candle tells a story of human emotion. Every spike, every reversal, every consolidation is a reflection of collective hope and fear. There is a rhythm in that chaos if you can listen beyond noise. But to hear it, you must quiet your own mind first, because you cannot read emotion clearly when you are drowning in your own. To trade well, you must learn to feel without reacting. It sounds paradoxical, but it's the essence of control. You let the emotion surface, you acknowledge it, you study it, and then you act from clarity, not from the feeling itself. That is how intuition evolves. Not as raw instinct, but as refined awareness built from repetition and reflection. The ego resists this path because it seeks shortcuts. Ego doesn't want patience. It wants validation. It wants to win now. It wants to prove superiority. It wants others to see its success. But every time ego wins a battle, the soul loses a lesson. The moment you start trading to prove something, you have already lost the game. True mastery begins when you no longer need to prove anything, when you can take a loss and feel peace, when you can take a win and feel calm, when your mind no longer swings with your equity curve. That is the still point where clarity lives. That's where your trading becomes an extension of who you are, not a reaction to who you're trying to be. Profit, at its deepest level, is not about accumulation. It's about alignment. Alignment between thought, action, and emotion. The market is simply the mirror that reflects how aligned or chaotic you are. You cannot hide from yourself here. Every click exposes truth. Every hesitation shows attachment. Every overtrade reveals fear. And when you begin to see it this way, you stop blaming the market for your pain. You stop searching for perfect indicators or magical systems. You start to realize the strategy was never the problem. The problem was always the state of mind executing it. The trader who understands this shifts focus inward. They begin to treat every mistake as data, every emotional spike as feedback. They evolve from emotional reactivity into emotional literacy. They begin to speak the language of the market, which is not spoken in words, but in waves of collective emotion. Over time, patterns emerge, not just on the chart, but in you. You start recognizing when greed rises. You start noticing when fear clouds perception. You learn to see the triggers before they become actions. And slowly, you reclaim your control. That is emotional evolution, the point where awareness becomes instinct. The market becomes your teacher, not your enemy. It humbles you when you drift into arrogance and rewards you when you surrender to discipline. It punishes ego, but it never lies. Every outcome is a mirror of process. You begin to respect the neutrality of it. The market is never wrong. Only our interpretation of it is. And then comes a quiet revelation, one that cannot be learned through books or strategies, only through experience. You don't trade the market to get rich. You trade the market to get real, to meet yourself without illusion, to confront your fear, your greed, your doubt, your need for control. The profits are simply a reflection of how much illusion you've dissolved along the way. At this stage, trading becomes meditation. Every entry is an act of mindfulness. Every exit is a lesson in detachment. Every loss is an invitation to humility. Every win is a reminder to stay grounded. The process becomes sacred. The screen becomes your mirror. The market becomes your teacher. You start to notice subtle things, how your breathing changes during drawdowns, how your posture shifts when you're confident, how your tone of thought changes when you're anxious. You begin to treat yourself as data, calmly, scientifically. This is the psychology of profit: awareness over impulse, observation over reaction. And as that awareness deepens, something inside begins to quiet. You stop chasing. You stop forcing. You stop needing to be right. You start allowing. You allow the trade to unfold. You allow time to pass. You allow outcomes to come and go. You are no longer the one pushing against the current. You become the one flowing with it. This flow state is rare. Most will never reach it because they are too busy fighting for control. But control was never the goal. Understanding was. And understanding begins only when resistance ends. There is beauty in watching the market without needing it to move in your favor. That is true neutrality. You see red candles and feel nothing. You see green candles and feel nothing. Not because you are emotionless, but because your emotions no longer dictate your truth. You have transcended the noise. And in that stillness, trading becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. You see setups for what they are, not what you want them to be. You manage risk not out of fear, but out of respect for reality. You cut losses with grace. You take profits with patience. You understand that survival is success. The longer you stay in this space, the more the external world begins to shift. You stop talking about the market like a battlefield. You start speaking of it like a reflection. You stop saying, I won or I lost. You start saying, I learned. The identity of a trader begins to merge with that of a seeker, someone who doesn't just chase wealth, but wisdom. And that wisdom eventually spills into life itself. You notice that the same emotions that once ruled your trades also ruled your relationships, your ambitions, your reactions. Fear, greed, impatience. They were never about the market. They were about you. The market was just the mirror that made them visible. This realization is the turning point. Because once you see your emotions as patterns, you gain the power to rewrite them. And once you master them in trading, you begin to master them in everything else. Decisions become cleaner, thoughts become slower, intentions become purer, profit becomes quiet. It's no longer loud, no longer something to show, no longer something to chase. It becomes something that flows in naturally as a byproduct of inner order. The trader becomes an observer, not a performer. At this level, ego has no foothold left. You stop competing with others. You start collaborating with reality. You no longer seek to outsmart, but to outlast. You realize the game was never about timing the market. It was about timing yourself. That is when the greatest paradox of trading reveals itself. The less you need the market, the more it gives you. The calmer you are, the clearer your decisions become. The more detached you are from the outcome, the more consistent your results become. Because profit follows peace, always. The mind that is clear will always see opportunities others overlook. The trader who has learned stillness will always act with precision while others panic. The one who has mastered emotion will always outlast the one who tries to master prediction. This is the psychology of profit, not a system, not a signal, not a shortcut, but a transformation. A shift from reaction to reflection, from chasing to allowing, from ego to awareness.